Well, we got some great questions that you, the viewer, sent in today, and Father Trajan is going to outline them for us.
Okay, one question we have today. If a priest commits a mortal sin, can he still say Mass?
Shame on him.
Bad boy. What if a priest dies before or during the consecration? God forbid.
Yeah.
Can a man with a major handicap become a priest?
Can he?
We'll find out. Why can't Episcopalians or Anglicans receive Holy Communion in the Catholic Church?
As Monsignor Rolf says, we never answer why questions, but today we will for you.
Well, just for you, yes.
Regina Caeli, laetare, Alleluia. Quia quem meruisti portare, Alleluia. Resurrexit, sicut dixit, Alleluia. Ora pro nobis Deum, Alleluia.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Web of Faith 2.1.5. It's our special quarantine edition that we are doing based on our regular show, which is Web of Faith 2.0 on EWTN, 11 o'clock Saturday nights Eastern Standard Time. My name is Father Kenneth Briganti from St. Mary Magna de Pazzi Parish in Flemington. I'd like to welcome all those, not only our parishioners, but those who are watching us on YouTube outside our parish boundaries. And I'd like to also welcome our illustrious guest and co-host,
Father John Trujillo, Diocese of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and Director of Pastoral Formation at Mount St. Mary's Seminary in Emmitsburg, Maryland.
And you can send in your questions on to us, and we would be happy to answer them on this series. And there will be an email address to send your questions in. And also, tomorrow being Friday, we're going to do something special the last 10 minutes. It's Fantasy Friday, and you'll have to tune in to see what that means and what we're going to do. But we're going to add a special feature every Fridays towards the end of our show to close out the week. So we hope that you will enjoy it, and we also will take suggestions from you, the viewer, on how we can make Fantasy Friday continue. And it's not playing gambling or anything.
It's not Fantasy Island either.
And it's not bingo, but it should be very interesting. So stay tuned tomorrow for that. Okay. All right, Father, you have a question. Dear Father Trujillo, love your show, love your masses. The church is gorgeous. My question is, if a priest has committed a mortal sin but cannot go to confession in time, can he still celebrate Mass? And if so, is it valid? Is it a sin? Sincerely, Dottie from Harrisburg.
Dottie, someone from my home place there. These are very good questions because back in the Middle Ages and the time of the Reformation, this was a question that came up on several occasions. First and foremost, the spiritual state of the priest does not affect the validity whatsoever. That is for the seven sacraments, because as the Council of Trent teaches us, the sacraments work ex opere operanto, and that means that they're not contingent on the spiritual state of the minister. Whereas in the sacramentals, like holy water, the rosary, they work ex opere operantis, which means the condition of the recipient determines whether or not they receive the grace. So if a priest celebrates Mass and he's in mortal sin, or even if he's in the state where he's a heretic or schismatic or apostate, it's still a valid sacrament as long as he intends to do what the church does.
And he does says the black, and
he must, yes, matter, form, and intention.
And does the red.
As long as he says the proper words, uses the proper materials, and intends to do what the church does, then it's a valid sacrament. However, if he celebrates Mass in the state of mortal sin, he himself is guilty of the sin of sacrilege, and therefore he commits the sin. But his sin does not affect the validity or the liceity of the sacrament. So, and this is very comforting, because in the Middle Ages, particularly in the decadent time when we had the Borgia and Medici popes, there were a lot of bishops and priests and even popes who
and poorly trained
bad,
priests too.
very badly trained because of the aftermath of the bubonic plague. People ask the question, well, if the minister is in sin, particularly mortal sin, then does that affect the validity? No. Now, if he's not validly ordained, obviously, that would affect the validity. But if he's ordained and he intends to do what the church does, he uses valid matter and form, you have nothing to be worried about. Now, what about the case of an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion? The church has not made an official dogmatic statement on it. There's nothing in canon law, but the common teaching is that if a person is assigned, they should, if possible, step back. But there's no requirement ever that you divulge you're in the state of mortal sin. So you're not obligated to show up at Mass, and let's say you're scheduled to help with communion that day and you're a layperson. You don't have to go up to the pastor and say, I can't distribute today because I'm in mortal sin. What you should do is try to get to confession. But if you can't, you need to make a good act of contrition, a perfect act of contrition, and then go to confession as soon as possible. But that's only in the case of necessity, where you are needed, not that it's convenient, and not just, because you can bow out for a number of reasons. You say, oh, I'm sorry, I can't go. It could be that you didn't observe the fast. It could be any number of things so that you never have to divulge your spiritual state.
Yeah, very good point. And but it is not that it has anything to do with the validity, but the spiritual life of the priest does affect the spiritual life of the parish. There is a great book called The Soul of the Apostolate, and it was written back in the 19th century. And this priest who wrote the book said, if the priest is holy, the people are good. If the priest is good, the people are fair. If the priest is fair, the people are going to be bad. And if the priest is bad, well, then it gets no worse than that. So the idea that the priest should always strive for holiness, not just for himself primarily, yes, but also for the sake of his children, which is his spiritual souls that he's entrusted to. So he is the leader, and he needs to set the example. And so doing so, there's no dichotomy between what he preaches and what he acts and believes. So while it's not always possible, and that's why priest needs to go to confession just as frequently as lay people, if not even more, there are times where that is not possible, because normally priests are hearing confessions on Saturday when the priest is hearing, the parish priest. But nevertheless, there should be an effort to go to regular confession, and to do so for the sake of his own soul, but also for his parishioners. So that dichotomy is not there.
Yes, absolutely, Father Ken, because the worst case would be a priest is not living his moral life or virtuous life. That's not going to go well with him. Even though the sacraments would be valid, he's going to spiral into a very bad situation where he may end up doing bad things or being thrown
Remember
out
that
of
old
priesthood.
commercial? Is it parquet? Is it butter? So, in the commercial, parquet butter. In other words, is it real or is it not real in the spiritual life of the priest? If he's authentic and being striving for holiness, that's really going to be translated to the people.
Yes.
And then what happens is when a priest is living a dissolute life, the prayer life usually is the first that goes out the window. And then when the prayer, they isolate themselves. And when they isolate themselves, then they just really fall apart. So That's why a priest needs to go to spiritual direction on a regular basis, needs to go to confession on a very frequent basis, needs to check in so that he keeps his prayer life up on par, because we are supposed to be men of prayer. And then in addition, with priestly fraternity, because the fraternity also helps keep you in checks and balance. If you're going a little bit off the deep end in some of your ideas, your brother priests usually are very good in helping and bringing you, reeling you back in. So fraternity is very important. So prayer, sacraments, fraternity, and one's spiritual life all go in together.
And parenthetically, I think there's a good time to mention this as well. Worst case scenario, like we had in the case of Theodore McCarrick and other priests and bishops who did horrible, despicable things that defiled the priesthood by abusing children and teenagers and so forth. No one needs to question if you were married by them or if you received, or you went to confession, baptism. Those sacraments were valid, even though the priest, God forbid, who gave them was in the worst state possible. You do not need to worry, because your salvation is more important. That priest is guilty. Every time one of those priests celebrated the sacraments with all this guilt on their soul, they're compounding their personal sin, but it doesn't affect the village. So the worst case scenario, you do not need to worry if you were married or you went to confession or baptized, or even if you went to, I know someone was confirmed by one of these bad bishops. Do not worry. But as Father Ken said, far better that the priest be holy and virtuous so that his people can follow the example.
And also, this brings up a very good point, Father, that, sometimes we hear of a priest leave the priesthood, okay, for whatever reason it may be. It was a lot more prevalent after the Second Vatican Council, like in the 70s and up to the 80s. There was a lot of priests that had left for their own reason. They weren't thrown out, so to speak, because of a serious.
They
nature.
left. They weren't.
But they
shocked.
left. Maybe they got married or whatever it may be. So someone said, "Well, Father was married by so and so, and now he's not a priest anymore." Well, but he is. Well, first of all, that you're always a priest forever, even if you're not actively functioning as one. But that's a sacramental character on your soul, like confirmation and baptism. But secondly, in the time when he was marrying you, he was a fully functioning, licensed, so to speak, by the bishop, okay, given canonical permission to do marriages and preach and teach in the parish and administer the other sacraments. So those sacraments were valid if, like Father mentioned earlier, if they following the manner, the form, and also the intention. So if they're doing all three of those things, yes, everything's fine with that. So if a priest does leave, it doesn't invalidate your marriage or things
It's
like that.
not retroactive, and there's no implications if that priest goes bad.
But here is a point. Just Dottie, you bring up such a rich question. There was a case of a parish church in Boston. They were a religious community, and they were baptizing with the wrong formula. They were baptizing in the name of the Creator, Redeemer, and Sanctifier. And there were about 1,500 baptisms. Well, the Archdiocese of Boston made that community go back to all their files because they were all invalid baptisms, because they were not doing the form or the intention of the way Holy Mother Church has. They might have been using water, okay, but their form was wrong. So they had to go and I don't know if they had it physically or if there's.
I think they had to redo everyone's baptism.
Yeah.
And that also had implications for their marriages.
Right.
Because for it to be the sacrament of marriage, you need to be validly baptized unless you need a dispensation. And worst case scenario, what if a priest had been baptized invalidly? He wouldn't be a valid priest.
Right, because baptism is the key to all the other sacraments. So that's why this all had to be corrected, and they had to go back to do that. Yeah, little. Needless to say, what happened to the community after that, I don't know.
God,
but
they were cast out.
Yeah, but that was a really bad violation.
Yes.
So, anyways, I hope Dottie that really answered more than the question you had, but it was really very all encompassing.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, here's something for you, Father Ken. Dear fathers, God bless you and your priesthood. Love your holy masses and sermons. What happens if a priest dies during Mass, before the consecration, or during it? And this is from Betty.
Well, Betty, if the priest dies before the consecration, then the Mass has not been satisfied. Okay, if he dies right after he consecrates the precious blood, then of course Mass has been the presents are there and what have you. And this happened many times in martyrs. One of the Blessed Stanley Rother, right? He was celebrating Mass. He's one of the first martyr for the United States, by the way, and he was in a missionary country. It was in Guatemala, and the Sandinistas, which were the communists, were running havoc, and he was celebrating Mass in their little parish church. The gunman came in right after the consecration and shot him. And to this day, there's a beautiful shrine there, and they kept his heart. The rest of his body was
sent home. And where did
he
go to school, Father Briganti?
He went where Father Trujillo presently works, and where I used to work, Mount St. Mary's Seminary in Emmitsburg, Maryland. So if you want to, there's a couple of great books on there, and EWTN also did a 1 hour special with Father Charles Connor on that. So Blessed Stanley Rother. But I think there were other priests too in the past.
Oscar Romero, I think, was celebrating
who's
Mass.
also a saint now. But let's say a priest dies of a heart attack, whatever, and all that.
The virus.
Well, she was saying right at the. Obviously, if he's having the virus, well, hopefully he's not saying Mass, in public there. But yes, so the two species have to be consecrated.
Now, what happens, Father Ken, if you're celebrating Mass, and this is hypothetical, so let's put you in your 90s, and you do the first consecration, but then you drop dead before you can consecrate the wine?
Well, then another priest, I think.
Yes, another priest. He doesn't start all over again. He must start where you left off,
right?
So that it's considered.
So you're younger than me, Father. So you hopefully you will be on my side, and you can jump right in. If
more
that ever
likely
happens.
be the other way around. But that's the only case where a priest would only finish where Father left off. Now, some old time pastors used to say, if the priest died before the collection, he was more worried about that. But for validity and for your obligation, you need to. The priest needs to consecrate both elements. For that to be a valid sacrament. Now, the priest also must consume both the precious blood and the sacred host in order for the sacrament to be completed.
So that's where the other one can jump in too.
Yes. Otherwise, the Mass intention would have to be resatisfied.
Right. So anyways, gruesome question, Betty, but hopefully that's...
Maybe we should take our temperatures before Mass.
But hopefully that... But really, read up on Blessed Stanley Rother,
yes.
since he's an American, and he will be considered a first martyr for the United States.
He's from Peoria? Or?
No. He's from Oklahoma.
Oklahoma, that's right. Fulton was from Peoria.
And the whole story is very interesting. It happened in the 1980s, by the way. He was ordained in the 60s. And in fact, he was not the brightest person. So he was
like John Vianney.
They sent him. They dismissed him at one seminary, and then the Mount took him. And at that time, they had to learn Latin. Mass was celebrated in Latin, etc. And that's where he was having a lot of trouble. But he was able to do so, learned it, and not only that, but became a saint. So, I mean, what a beautiful story it is indeed. But he died right in the act of celebrating Mass. But if you got to go, that's the way to go.
And I think he resembles Father Marinelli.
He does.
He had a beard and red
head,
hair.
Beard, mustache, and the same halo like Father Marinelli has.
Yes.
So if you see them, you'll be interesting to see that image. But anyways, a great book. Great hour episode on EWTN. I think you could probably purchase that as well, and the book from the library of EWTN. Okay, this one is for you, Father.
Okay.
Dear Father John, it's so nice to see you and Father Ken and Father Matthew celebrating Mass every day, and glad that you're safe here in Flemington, New Jersey. My question is this. Can a man with a major handicap or disability be ordained a priest? signed Norma.
Norma.
Gee, I wonder if
What
that's
a
my mother.
lovely name, yes.
But I know
Lovely
it's not because she's not computer savvy. She calls it the machine.
Well, Norma, I'm glad you asked that question. Now, prior to 1983, we had what we called the 1917 Code of Canon Law. And even before that, we had the decretals of Pope Gregory. It had been the practice, and this was not dogma, this was not doctrine, this was the discipline, that the priest had to be in complete good health. Particularly, he had to be able to see, had to be able to speak, hear. He needed, we call the canonical digits, your first finger, your forefinger, and your thumb, so he could hold the host, because in the old days, that's what actually...
But who was given a dispensation from that? An American martyr.
Yes, you could get a dispensation.
Isaac Jogues.
Because he had his fingers chopped off by the Indians.
Chopped his fingers off, and when he came back from France, he was need to celebrate Mass. So the Pope at the time gave him dispensation because he didn't have his canonical fingers. That's why the Native Americans that were persecuting him cut those fingers off to help to stop them celebrating Mass.
But now, since the 1983 code, a lot of those impediments were removed. So that, for instance, prior to 83, if a priest or a seminarian had epilepsy, you needed a dispensation from Rome in order to be ordained. That's no longer the case. You could be blind. In fact, there's a priest in Allentown. I think, Father, again, you might remember him, Father Bernie Izaki.
Mm-hmm.
He's completely blind, not just legally blind, but blind, and he's been a very full-functioning priest, a holy priest. His people love him. But he can't see. There's priests who are deaf. There are priests who are in wheelchairs. So today,
and there are even priests who have to take medication to keep them sort of mentally balanced, to say the least.
Yes.
Say that.
So now it's true, if you're in the seminary and you have a lot of disabilities, that's going to impede you to the point where they may say, we don't know if you're going to be a properly functioning priest if you have a lot of these disabilities. But one disability alone is not per se going to disqualify you, and especially if you show that you're able to overcome those challenges.
Although interesting, and is one seminarian, remember, had Tourette's syndrome, and that's when they have like a tic or something like that, and he was allowed to study. I don't think he made it though, but
well, we have somebody now at our seminary with Tourette's. Now he's got it managed, but when he gets stressed and nervous, it comes out, and again, it's a little bit of a tic. Sometimes in severe cases of Tourette's, though, they swear.
Right.
And that's going to be a bit awkward if you're
that
a priest.
probably would be used.
Yeah, because if you're stressed out and you're up there.
Unless you're from Brooklyn or the Bronx, it's acceptable.
Yeah,
there,
but if you're in Peoria, it's not going to go well.
It doesn't play well in Peoria.
No, cursing at the pulpit or yelling at people. But psychological things that can be controlled. So again, only severe cases where you would not be able to function even in lay society. But we do evaluate when guys come into the seminary if they have a couple of disabilities, whether they're mental or physical.
Well,
how challenging are they?
Here's another an example. There was and this is why it's so important, to check this all out physically and all that, because the human formation skills could be an impediment to the people. So that's why you have to see how it works out, that whatever physical disability. There's one case, he's a priest now, but he had a severe brain tumor, and that was removed and benign, but it left the one eye sort of not functioning. So when he went into this parish as a seminarian, or I think he was a deacon at the point, deacon or seminarian, he introduced himself. And so one eye was focused on the people and one eye was going another way. And the parent of a child thought that he was ogling that child and was very nervous and concerned and approached the pastor about that after. And that's when the seminarian says, no, that eye is dead. I have no control over it.
Yeah.
Does it move around or anything like that? And so the pastor says, well, you need to say that in the beginning, because that could be an hindrance to people or make people nervous or what have you. Once they know what that fact is, the idea that it does that won't, but you need to dispel anything like that. So, but I would say Normally, if you see one eye going that way, there's got to be something physically wrong there
Yes.
that you're not ogling.
Yes.
But in our hypersensitive society,
Yes,
you know,
and the same with the fellow with Tourette's. If he introduces himself the first day and says, if you at times notice some odd noises or twitches in me, and explains that's because I have this condition called Tourette's. Or we have another seminarian who he has severe hearing loss, or at least in one ear, because he served in the military, I think in Iraq or Afghanistan, or maybe both. And because of that, he tends to talk louder than other seminarians. As long as if you explain that to people, well, people will not only cut you some slack, they'll appreciate, because they themselves have some physical challenges. So if you tell people ahead of time, as opposed to just letting it happen,
Right.
I think people want transparency.
And let's not forget about, he's a priest now too, same diocese as this other one with the eye, who had a stuttering problem, very severe stuttering problem, but interesting enough, when he preaches, it didn't come out.
Yes,
it was
that's,
more like in regular conversation.
Or I've heard where when they preach in a different language, a priest in my diocese has a bad stutter, and it really comes out when he's stressed and that. But when he sings, or when he does it in Spanish, not a stutter at all. It's only in English and when he's nervous and stressed out. But again, when you explain that to people, they're very accommodating. We had a priest in my diocese who had ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and obviously he got that after he was ordained. But the people, once they told them what was happening, they volunteered to go to the rectory and help him, dress him, feed him, clothe him, bathe him, everything, which was a testimony to their love for him.
There's also a case, I think there's a book on it too, of a seminarian who had cancer, and he was ordained on his deathbed, actually, and his first mass was his ordination mass. And then he didn't live after that, but he had such a holy and sanctified, lived a sanctified life, that the bishop said it was worth ordaining him, not only for the mass that he celebrated, but also for the example in the patients that he had and the perseverance through his cancer. And there is a book, I think, and I don't remember the name of them about this priest, but I bet you if you Google it, it'll come right up. But very heroic life, and he was given a very special permission to be ordained in a hospital room and to celebrate Mass there. All right. We have a final question here.
Uh-oh.
Dear Father Briganti and Father Trigilio, so it's to both of us.
Okay.
Why can't Episcopalians or Anglicans receive Holy Communion in the Catholic Church, or vice versa? Billy from Flemington.
Billy from Flemington. Okay. Well, Billy, I'm glad you asked that, because we get asked that a lot. And from a lot of people's perspective, they think this is unfair or unkind, particularly when you go to non-Catholic Christian churches, Protestant churches. They have what they call open communion, and they will say very publicly, everyone's invited to come up, regardless of your denomination. We as Catholics and the Orthodox Christians follow the same practice. We say no. It's not because we think the other churches have cooties. It's not because we think you're bad or you're not properly disposed. For us, we do not see communion as a means of building community. We see communion as the final effect, the final fruit of unity. So one must be in communion to receive communion. And the analogy I like to use is that just like, I'm in New Jersey right now. I'm from Pennsylvania. I work in Maryland. All three states, though, belong to the United States. So regardless of what state I'm in, I can go to the bank. I can get a job.
You mean like that song, Whatever State of Mind You're In? Are you in a New York state of mind, Father?
I don't know about New York right now, but I know I'm in New Jersey. Now, most Protestant churches see the different denominations like we would see how the different states are. They're all Americans, but they're different states. Catholics and Eastern Orthodox, we look at it as you would look at United States and Canada. We have similar cultures. We speak the same language. You can be a Canadian citizen and live in the United States and vice versa. However, if you're a U.S. citizen and you're living in Canada, you cannot vote in Canadian elections. You cannot run for office in Canada until you become a Canadian citizen.
All I have to say is thank God. No, I'm sorry. We love our Canadian brothers
and likewise,
and sisters.
if you're a Canadian citizen living here in the United States, You cannot vote, you cannot hold office until you become a U.S. citizen. Ergo, if you want to receive communion in the Catholic Church, you must become a member of the Catholic Church. Now, as a Protestant Christian, you can come to Mass, you can join us in many things, but to receive communion, you must be fully in communion.
It's very interesting. One of my first people that I worked in converting to the Catholic faith was an Episcopal, well, actually full communion is the term we use, was an Episcopalian lady. Her children married Catholics and became Catholic, and she's been attending Mass, and she was so upset that she could not receive communion because in her thought, she believed that it was the body, blood, soul, and divinity. And I says, well, that's true. Then you need to be communion altogether in thought, and you need to jump the extra mile and become a Catholic.
Cross the Tiber, as they say.
And you know what? She became one of the best Catholics. She was so happy she went through instruction, and she was so happy that I get a card from her. She lives in Texas now. Get a card from her every Easter in which she mentions how she appreciates her Catholic faith. Anyways, we appreciate you, and we're coming to the end of another wonderful episode. And I just wanted to remind you, tune in tomorrow for Fantasy Friday. And what does that mean?
They're on the edge of their seat.
I hope you are.
Yeah.
I mean, it's quarantine time. It's not much that can move us to the edge of our seat. We'd like to thank our producer, our editor, our sound man, our cameraman, Father Matthew Marinelli, who puts this show together for us. And again, if you like to send in some questions.
We thank Carmela, too, for getting the questions for us.
Yeah, she does. Carmela sends all the questions over to us. Really appreciate our secretary. And once you see what Fantasy Friday is, maybe you'll have some ideas for us on the future Friday shows as we go forward.
I'm nervous.
And and then finally, we'd like to thank you for your continued support of the parish. Remember, electronic giving is always an option, and you can sign up for that, or PayPal, or even texting. That secures a regular contribution to there. But if you cannot, please send in your donations. And I just want to thank you. Carmela always receives the mail and says there's always a good stack of donations that are coming in. So thank you for supporting your parish.
I think somebody sent their stimulus check-in, didn't they?
They tithed it, actually. Yeah, and they mentioned that. That was a very nice gesture. And know that we priests and sisters in the parish are praying for you every day, for your health, your safety, and for a quick and speedy end to this pandemic. So I think we come to the conclusion of another episode, and that usually means a blessing, right, Father?
Okay.
And I defer to my colleague.
Yes, yeah. The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
May Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
May God bless you until we see you the next time.
Bye-bye.
Of heaven rejoice. Alleluia. Alleluia. Come on. For he whom thou didst bear. Alleluia. Alleluia. Has risen as he said.